The following episode discusses disturbing subject matter, which may be triggering for some viewers. Please proceed with caution. Please also keep in mind that this episode is for entertainment purposes only. It is based on publicly available information, and I am not a licensed professional. All situations and individuals discussed are alleged unless otherwise stated. Welcome to Crime Time 911, where true crime takes center stage. I'm Mel, and together we'll dive deep into real cases, uncover chilling details, and explore the darker side of the human nature. If you live for the twists, the mystery, and the pursuit of justice, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications so you don't miss out. Now let's get into it. Today we're diving into the tragic and infuriating story of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. To get a sense of our lovely couple's origins, let's start from the beginning. Paul Bernardo was born in Scarborough, Ontario on August 27, 1964. He was the third and youngest child of Kenneth and Marilyn Bernardo. Paul's father would often essay his older sister Deborah in front of other family members and would later end up being charged with crimes involving voyeurism and pedophile-related crimes. Paul's mother would often withdraw from the family due to her depression and agoraphobia. Agoraphobia is an intense fear of being in open places or situations where it may be hard to escape, or where help may not be available. Eventually, his mother moved into the basement of their home. Paul appeared to be a happy and well-adjusted child despite his family's dysfunction, and was an active member in Scouts Canada, but not everything is as it appears to be. Underneath Paul's charming facade, he was gradually developing pyromaniac inclinations and dark sexual fantasies, one of which involved creating a virgin farm where Paul could breed virgin girls to essay. In 1981, after Paul, who was 16 at the time, and his parents had a fight, his mother revealed that he was the result of an extramarital affair and that Kenneth was not his biological father. Devastated, Paul called his mother horrible names, and she reciprocated by calling him a bastard from hell. Paul's first girlfriend broke up with him to be with one of his friends after she grew weary of his domineering behavior. Paul sought revenge by setting all of her belongings that he had access to on fire. Paul attended Sir Wilfrid Laurier Collegiate Institute, and then, in 1982, he attended the University of Toronto Scarborough, also known as UTSC, where another notorious Canadian murderer, Russell Williams, was coincidentally 2 years behind him. Paul and his college friends often practiced pickup techniques on young women they met in bars, and were quite successful at it. Paul enjoyed embarrassing his dates in public and engaging in aggressive anal sex in bed. He grew more and more violent in his relationships and often threatened to kill his girlfriends if they reported the abuse. In 1986, Paul was served with restraining orders by 2 women after obscene phone calls he had made to them. Karla Homolka, on the other hand, was born May 4, 1970, in St. Catharines, Ontario. Her family environment was more stable than what Paul's had been. Karla's childhood was marked by a loving family dynamic. Even though her father was strict, he was an affectionate man, and her mother was often described as a traditional homemaker who taught her children the value of hard work and respect. Despite Karla's positive upbringing, she would later take a turn for the worse. Reports suggest that Karla often sought attention and validation from others outside of her family, sometimes resorting to dramatic displays at school to gain sympathy and attention from her peers. As a student, Karla was considered bright, but lacked a consistent sense of direction. She had a knack for manipulation and used her charm to bend others to her will. Throughout high school, she was known for her social nature, often organizing events and gatherings. But despite her appearance to be outgoing and social, deep down she had a deep-seated desire to be accepted and feared rejection. In October 1987, Karla attended a pet store conference in Scarborough. This is where she met Paul. The two shared an immediate attraction. As they started their relationship, a complex dynamic quickly developed. Paul's charisma drew Karla in, while her need for acceptance and love kept her tangled in his web of vitality. Karla started to mirror Paul's risky behaviors by engaging in petty crimes and becoming more defiant. As the relationship grew, it would not only prove to be intense, but also destructive. Soon they would be engaged, and this commitment solidified their bond. The highly publicized cases that would emerge from their partnership would later reflect the catastrophic consequences of their union. Trigger warning: the following discusses disturbing subject matter which may be triggering for some. Please continue with caution. Between 1987 and 1990, Paul committed a string of vicious essays in and around Scarborough. He targeted most of his victims as they got off buses late in the evenings. Known incidences are as follows. On May 4th, 1987, essay of a 21-year-old Scarborough woman in front of her parents' house after Paul followed her home. May 14th, 1987, the essay of a 19-year-old woman in the backyard of her parents' house. July 17th, 1987, attempted essay of a young woman. Although he beat the victim, Paul abandoned the attack when she fought back. September 29th, 1987, attempted essay of a 15-year-old girl. Paul had broken into the victim's house and entered her bedroom. He jumped on her back, put his hand over her mouth, threatened her with a knife, bruised the side of her face, and bit her ear. Paul fled when the victim's mother entered the room and screamed. Anthony Hainmayer would end up being wrongfully convicted of the assault in 1989 and served a 16-month prison sentence, but he was exonerated after Paul admitted the crime in 2006. December 16th, 1987, the essay of a 15-year-old girl. The next day, the Toronto Police Service issued a warning to women in Scarborough traveling alone at night, especially those riding buses. December 23rd, 1987, the essay of a 17-year-old girl with a knife he used to threaten his victims. At this point, he began to be known as the Scarborough R-word. April 18th, 1988, the attack of a 17-year-old girl. On May 25th, 1988, Bernardo was nearly caught by a uniformed officer staking out a bus shelter. Although the officer noted him hiding under a tree and pursued him on foot, Paul escaped. May 30th, 1988, the essay of an 18-year-old woman in Mississauga, Ontario, about 40 kilometers southwest of Scarborough. October 4th, 1988, attempted essay in Scarborough. Although his intended victim fought him off, Paul inflicted two stab wounds to her thigh and buttock, which required 12 stitches. November 16th, 1988, essay of an 18-year-old woman in the backyard of her parents' house. November 17th, 1988, police formed a task force to capture the Scarborough R-word. December 27th, 1988, attempted essay with a neighbor chasing Bernardo off. June 20th, 1989, attempted essay. The young woman fought and her screams alerted her neighbors. Bernardo fled with scratches on his face. August 15th, 1989, the essay of a 22-year-old woman. November 21st, 1989, the essay of a 15-year-old girl Paul saw in a bus shelter. December 22nd, 1989, the essay of a 19-year-old woman. May 26, 1990, another essay of a 19-year-old woman. The victim's vivid recollection of her attacker enabled police to create a computer composite portrait, which was released 2 days later by police and publicized in Toronto and surrounding areas. In July of 1990, 2 months after police had received tips that Paul resembled the Scarborough R-word, they finally interviewed him. From May to September 1990, police submitted more than 130 suspects' DNA samples in for testing. In June, a tip was filed by a bank employee, and later a second tip would be filed by Tina Smirnis. Tina was the wife of one of 3 Smirnis brothers, who had been some of Paul's closest friends. Smirnis told detectives that Paul had been called in on R-word investigation back in December 1987, but he had never actually been interviewed. Paul frequently talked about his his sex life to Smyrnis and said that he enjoyed rough sex. November 20th, 1990, police would interview Paul for 35 minutes, and he would voluntarily provide a DNA sample for testing. When detectives asked Paul why he thought he was being investigated for the crimes, he admitted that he resembled the composite sketch. Apparently, detectives found Paul to be more credible than Smyrnis. Little did the detective know their trust in Paul would cost the lives of several young girls. By 1990, Paul had lost his job as an accountant and began smuggling cigarettes across the nearby Canadian-U.S. border. He spent long periods of time with the Homolka family, who were unaware of his criminal tendencies and liked him very much. Even though he was engaged to Karla, Paul became increasingly obsessed with Karla's younger sister, Tammy. He peered through her window and entered her room while she slept to pleasure himself. Karla helped Paul gain access to her sister by breaking the windows in Tammy's room. 6 months before Paul and Karla's wedding in 1991, Karla stole an anesthetic from the clinic she worked at. On December 23, 1990, Paul and Karla spiked a rum and eggnog drink with sleeping pills and gave it to 15-year-old Tammy. When she lost consciousness, Paul and Karla began to undress her. Karla applied a cloth soaked in the stolen anesthetic and placed it over Tammy's nose and mouth. As a Christmas gift to Paul, Karla wanted to give Tammy's virginity to him. According to Karla, Paul was disappointed that he was not her first intimate partner. While Tammy's parents slept peacefully upstairs, the couple videotaped themselves R-wording Tammy in the basement. Suddenly, Tammy began to vomit. Karla and Paul attempted to revive her. When they couldn't, they hid incriminating evidence, dressed Tammy, and brought her to her bedroom, and that's when they decided to call 911. A few hours later, Tammy was pronounced deceased at St. Catherine's General Hospital. She never regained consciousness. Despite witnesses seeing Paul and Karla vacuuming and washing laundry in the middle of the night, as well as the chemical burn on Tammy's face, the regional municipality of Niagara coroner and Karla's family accepted the couple's version of events. The official ruling of Tammy's death was accidental, the result of choking on her own vomit after consuming alcohol. Not long after Tammy's death, Paul and Karla would videotape themselves engaging in intimate acts while Karla wore Tammy's clothes and pretended to be her. Paul and Karla moved out of the Homolka house into a rented bungalow in Port Dalhousie to allow Karla's parents to grieve. It would later be reported that during Tammy's funeral, Paul was seen caressing her body in the open casket. Paul and Karla had placed a copy of their wedding invitation, which featured a photo of the couple smiling happily, and they added a note. These items would be discovered 3 years later when Tammy's body would be exhumed. At the request of the Homolka family, these items were then removed. Early morning of June 15, 1991, while touring around Burlington to steal license plates, Paul spotted 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey. Leslie had been locked out of her house when she missed her curfew after attending a friend's wake. Paul got out of his car and approached Leslie, telling her that he wanted to break into a neighbor's house. Unfazed, Leslie asked Paul if he had any cigarettes. Paul then led Leslie to his car, where he blindfolded her, forced her into the car, and took her to his home in Port Dalhousie. When he arrived, he told Karla they had a victim. True to their pattern, Paul and Karla videotaped themselves torturing and essaying Leslie while listening to pop music. It's reported that at one point, Paul said, and I quote, "You're doing a good job, Leslie, a damned good job," adding, "The next 2 hours are going to determine what I do to you. Right now, you're scoring perfect." On a segment of the tape played at Paul's trial, the assault escalated. Leslie cried out in pain and begged Paul to stop. In the Crown's description of the scene, Paul was sodomizing her while her hands were bound with twine. Leslie would later tell Paul that her blindfold was slipping, which signaled the possibility that she would be able to identify her attackers if she lived. Paul claimed that the next day, Karla gave Leslie a lethal dose of the same anesthetic that killed Tammy, but Karla would claim that Paul strangled the girl. They would then put Leslie's lifeless body in their basement while they attended a family dinner at the Homolka home. After dinner, Paul and Karla decided to dismember Leslie's body and encase each part in cement. It's reported that Paul had purchased a dozen bags of cement at a hardware store the following day. Paul kept the receipts, which would later be used as evidence at his trial. After using Paul's grandfather's circular saw to cut apart poor Leslie, the couple made numerous trips to dump the cement blocks in Lake Gibson, which is 18 kilometers south of Port Dalhousie. One of the blocks reportedly weighed 200 pounds, which was beyond their ability to sink. It would later be found on June 29, 1991, laying near the shore, which was the day of Paul and Karla's wedding. Leslie's orthodontic appliance was key in identifying her. In 2005, Paul claimed that he always intended to free the girls. But when Leslie's blindfold slipped, Karla was worried that she would be able to identify them and report them to the police. Fast forward to April 16, 1992. Paul and Karla drove through St. Catharines looking for potential victims. Even though students were still making their way home, the streets were relatively empty. As they cruised by Holy Cross Secondary School, the couple spotted 15-year-old Kristen French walking home. They pulled into the parking lot of the nearby Grace Lutheran Church, where Karla would get out of her car carrying a map and pretending to need help. As Kristen looked at the map, Paul snuck up from behind and attacked, forcing the girl into the front seat of the car at knife point. Karla climbed into the back seat and subdued Kristen by pulling her hair. After Kristen failed to arrive home after school, her parents grew increasingly concerned for their daughter's safety and called the police. Within 24 hours, the Niagara Regional Police put together a team and began to search the route that Kristen would take after school. They found multiple witnesses who had seen the abduction from different locations. Why didn't any of these people call the police? So many people failed this poor girl. Kristen's shoe would then be discovered from the parking lot that she was abducted from. Over that Easter weekend, Paul and Karla videotaped themselves essaying Kristen and forcing her to drink large amounts of alcohol to get her to submit to Paul. Later at Paul's trial, the Crown prosecutor said that Paul had always intended to end the life of Kristen because she was never blindfolded and would be able to identify her attackers. The following day, Paul and Karla ended Kristen's life before going to the Homolka's home for Easter dinner. Karla would testify at her trial that Paul strangled Kristen for 7 minutes while she watched. Paul would claim that Karla beat Kristen with a rubber mallet because she had tried to escape, and then she was strangled with the noose around her neck, which was secured to a hope chest. Kristen's naked body was found on April 30, 1992, in a ditch in Burlington, which is about 45 minutes away from St. Catharines and not too far from the cemetery where Tammy is buried. In addition to the 3 confirmed murders committed by Paul and Karla, there are still suspicions of other potential or intended victims. Derek Finkel's book, No Claim to Mercy, presented evidence that tied Paul to the presumed murder of Elizabeth Bain, who had disappeared on June 19, 1990. Elizabeth told her mother that she was going to check the tennis schedule at UTSC. 3 days later, her car would be found with a large blood stain on the back seat. Paul had matched the description of a man that had been seen in the same area where Elizabeth was also last seen, and later confessed to at least 8 attacks in and around the same area. Elizabeth's boyfriend, Robert Baltovich, was later convicted of second degree in her death on March 31, 1992. During Robert's trial and subsequent imprisonment, Robert and his lawyers would allege that Paul was the perpetrator. The Court of Appeal for Ontario set aside Robert's conviction on December 2, 2004, and at his retrial on April 22, 2008, the Crown told the jury that no evidence would be brought against Robert and asked the jury to find him not guilty of second degree. When Paul was asked about Elizabeth in 2007, he said, quote, "The answer to that is no, but the 800-pound gorilla in the room is that it is a life to 25 sentence." I'm not really exactly sure what he meant by that, so if you have any ideas, please post them below. Shortly after Tammy Homolka's funeral, her parents had left town and her sister Lori was at their grandparents' house in Mississauga, leaving the Homolka home empty. According to the author Stephen Williams, during the weekend of January 12, 1991, Paul had abducted a girl, took her to the house, and essayed her while Karla watched. They then dropped the girl off on a deserted road near Lake Gibson. Paul and Karla would refer to the girl as January Girl. On April 6, 1991, at approximately 5:30 a.m., Paul abducted a 14-year-old who was training to be a coxswain for a local rowing team. The girl was distracted by a blonde lady who waved at her from a car, allowing Paul to drag the girl into the nearby bushes near the rowing club. He then essayed her, forcing her to remove her clothing, and made her wait 5 minutes while he disappeared. June 7, 1991, Karla invited a 15-year-old girl, who was referred to as Jane Doe during the trials, that she had befriended at a pet shop 2 years earlier. After being incapacitated with substances, Jane Doe was essayed by the couple, which of course they videotaped. In August, Jane Doe was invited back to the couple's residence and given substances again. Karla called 911 for help after the girl vomited and stopped breathing while being essayed. The ambulance was recalled after Paul and Karla were able to resuscitate the girl. On July 28, 1991, Paul stalked Sydney Kirshen, who was 21 at the time, after he saw her while he was driving home from work. On August 9th, he continued to stalk her, but this time she took evasive action, stopping by her boyfriend's house. After spotting Paul, the boyfriend chased after him. He saw Paul's golden Nissan and took note of the license plate. The couple reported the incident to police, who confirmed that the car belonged to Paul. An officer paid a visit to Paul's house and saw the car parked in the driveway. However, he did not pursue the matter and did not submit an official police report. During a police search of the Bernardo's house, a newspaper clipping was found that described an essay that occurred in Hawaii while the couple was honeymooning in the summer of 1991. Law enforcement in both Canada and the U.S. have stated that they believe that Paul is responsible for this assault, but due to extradition issues, the case was never prosecuted. On November 30th, 1991, Terry Anderson, a grade 9 student at Lakeport Secondary School, which was nearby Kristen French's Catholic school, vanished less than 2 kilometers from the parking lot where Kristen would later be abducted. In April of 1992, the police stated they had no evidence to link this case to Paul. Terry's body would be discovered in the water in Port Dalhousie. The coroner claimed to find no evidence of foul play, despite the difficulties of determining these factors in a body that had been submerged in water for 6 months. The cause of death ended up being ruled a drowning. March 29, 1992, Paul had stalked and videotaped sisters Shanna and Carrie Patridge while in his car, following them while they went to their parents' house. The sisters had written down Paul's license plate incorrectly. Shanna had reported the incident to police on March 31st and was given an incident number in case anything further developed. On April 18, 1992, while Kristen was still being held captive, Carrie spotted Paul while he was out buying dinner and renting a movie. Carrie was able to get a better description of his license plate and his vehicle and then reported it to the police. This information would later be mishandled by police. In 2006, Paul would confess to at least 10 more assaults dating back to March of 1986, including the 1987 assault of a 15-year-old girl. An innocent man, Anthony Haymair, as mentioned earlier, had been convicted of the assault and served a full sentence for it. On June 15, 2008, the Court of Appeal for Ontario overturned the conviction and exonerated Anthony. That is so sad that this poor guy spent all that time in jail for something that these monsters did. Paul and Karla were questioned by police multiple times in connection with the Scarborough R-word investigation, Tammy's death, and Paul's stalking of women before they had abducted Kristen. Paul was interviewed briefly on May 2nd, 1992 by a Niagara Regional Police Sergeant and Constable, in which they concluded that Paul was an unlikely suspect, even though he admitted he had been previously questioned in connection with the Scarborough R-word. 3 days later, the Green Ribbon Task Force was created to investigate the cases of Leslie and Kristen. Paul and Karla had applied to have their names legally changed to Teal, which Paul had gotten from a serial killer in a 1988 film called Criminal Law. In December of 1992, the Center of Forensic Sciences finally began to test the DNA samples that were provided by Paul 2 years earlier. On December 27th, Paul allegedly beat Karla severely with a flashlight, leaving multiple bruises. Claiming she had been in a car accident, Karla went back to work on January 4th, 1993. Her coworkers were skeptical and called Karla's parents, and they rescued her the following day. Karla's parents had to physically remove her from the home she shared with Paul. However, Karla ran back inside, frantically searching for something. Karla's parents then took her to the St. Catharines General Hospital, where she gave a statement to police that she had been a battered spouse and proceeded to file charges against Paul. Paul was then arrested and later released on his own recognizance. 26 months after Paul had submitted his DNA for testing, Toronto police were advised that it matched with the Scarborough R-word. They immediately placed him under a 24-hour surveillance. The Metro Toronto Sexual Assault Squad investigators had interviewed Karla on February 9, 1993. Despite hearing their allegations about Paul, Karla focused strictly on his abuse of her. Later on that night, Karla would reveal to her aunt and uncle that Paul was, in fact, the Scarborough R-word, and that she and Paul were also involved in the essay and murders of both Leslie and Kristen, and that they had recorded their crimes. The Niagara Regional Police then reopened the investigation in the death of Tammy Homolka. 2 days later, Karla met with a Niagara Falls lawyer, George Walker, who sought legal immunity from the Crown prosecutor in exchange for her cooperation. Paul and Karla's name change request was approved on February 13, 1993. The following day, Walker met with the Crown Criminal Law Office Director, Murray Segal, telling him about the videotapes. Segal told Walker that due to Karla's involvement in the crimes, full immunity was not a possibility. Thank God. Could you imagine someone who committed such horrifying crimes just being able to walk away scot-free? Crazy. On February 17th, Paul was arrested on several charges and detectives obtained a search warrant. Due to Paul's connection to the murders being weak, the warrant was limited. No evidence which was not expected and documented within the warrant could be removed from the residence, and all videotapes found by police had to be viewed within the house. Any damage had to be kept to a minimum. Police could not tear down walls looking for the tapes. The search of the house, which included updated warrants, lasted 71 days, and only one tape was found by police which contained a brief clip of Karla performing oral acts on Jane Doe. While in jail, Paul called his lawyer, Ken Murray, and told him that the essay tapes were hidden in a ceiling light fixture in the upstairs bathroom. Murray went to the residence, found the tapes, and hid them from the investigators. Murray ended up resigning, and John Rosen was then hired as Paul's new attorney. Rosen turned the tapes over to the police. At least one lawyer is doing the right thing here. On May 5th, Walker was informed that the government was offering Karla a plea bargain of 12 years in prison, which she had 1 week to accept. If she declined, she would be charged with 2 counts of first degree and 1 count of second degree, as well as other crimes. Karla ultimately agreed, and the plea bargain was finalized. She then began to give statements to the investigators. She told police that Paul bragged about essaying as many as 30 women. That was twice as many as police had suspected. Karla's plea bargain was criticized by many Canadians because Murray, Paul's first lawyer, withheld the videotapes exposing Karla's involvement in the crimes for 17 months. The tapes were considered crucial evidence, and prosecutors revealed that they would have never agreed to a plea bargain if they had known what those tapes contained. To protect Paul's right to a fair trial, a publication ban was imposed on Karla's preliminary inquiry. The Crown had applied for the ban. Paul's lawyers argued that he would be prejudged by the ban since Karla had been portrayed as his victim. Public access to the internet effectively nullified the court's order, as did the proximity to the Canadian-US border. The American media were not subject to the publication ban and began to publish details of Karla's testimony, which were distributed by electronic ban breakers. In February 1994, Karla divorced Paul. Paul's trial for the murders of Kristen and Leslie began in 1995. It included Karla's detailed testimony and the videotapes of the essay. Paul testified that the deaths were accidental. He would later claim that Karla was the actual killer. On September 1st, 1995, Paul was convicted of multiple offenses, including 2 first-degree, 2 aggravated essay, and was sentenced to life in prison without parole for at least 25 years. He was designated a dangerous offender, making him unlikely to ever be released. Even though Paul was kept in the segregation unit at Kingston Penitentiary for his own safety, he was still harassed and attacked. He was punched in the face by another inmate when he was returning from the shower in 1996. In June 1999, 5 inmates tried to storm his segregation range, and a riot squad had to use gas to disperse them. I mean, I can't say I feel sorry for the monster. He deserves a whole lot worse. Paul became eligible for parole in February 2018, but was denied day and full parole by the Parole Board of Canada. His next parole hearing was in June 2021 and was denied again. He was then denied parole for a third time in November 2024. As for Karla, she went to Kingston's Prison for Women. In the summer of 1997, Karla was moved to Joliet Institution, which is a medium-security prison in Joliet, Quebec. In 1999, the Toronto Star reported that Karla had applied for a transfer to a halfway house, which was in close proximity to local schools. The release of this information was too fast for the Canadian courts, who had issued a publication ban on the information hours after it had already been published to the public. Karla sued the government when her transfer to the halfway house was denied. In 2001, Karla was transferred to the Saint Anne des Plaines Institution, which is a maximum security prison in Quebec. Now, I don't know much about how prisons work, but isn't moving from a medium security prison back to a maximum security prison sort of like backpedaling? If any of the listeners out there knows more about why this may have happened, please definitely feel free to comment below. I truly want to know how this would work going from medium to maximum prison. Anyway, during Karla's release hearing, psychiatrist Louis Morissette said that she did not represent a threat to society. There have been a mixture of opinions over the years. A forensic psychologist for Correctional Services Canada stated that, and I quote, "It lay in the ominous but not unlikely possibility of her linking up with another sexual sadist like Paul. It's not for nothing that she did what she did with Paul." So what my understanding of what this psychologist is saying is that she has the potential to reoffend if she ends up being with another monster like Paul. Now, maybe I'm misunderstanding what that means. If you have any other better, different, whatever ideas, please definitely list them below. Due to Karla being deemed a risk to reoffend, she was denied statutory release 2/3 of the way through her sentence. In 2004, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation reported that the National Parole Board has ruled that Karla Homolka must stay in prison for her full sentence, warning that she remains a risk to commit another violent crime. A rumor that Karla had intended to relocate to Alberta, Canada, caused an uproar in that province, which of course it did. Most places have enough criminals to worry about. Who wants another one? On July 4th, 2005, Karla was released from St. Anne de Plains prison, which came with very specific conditions in which the penalty for violating the order would come with a maximum of 2 years in prison. Karla stated in an interview with Radio Canada Television, speaking entirely in French, that she found Quebec to be more accepting of her than Ontario, as her case gained more attention in the English-speaking provinces than it did in the French-speaking province. Due to this, she would settle in Quebec. In 2006, Karla requested to have her name legally changed to Emily Tiara Tremblay. Tremblay is one of the most common surnames in the province of Quebec, but this request was rejected. In my opinion, I'm glad it was rejected. She shouldn't be able to hide from her past. She's lucky she got that amazing plea deal, because in my opinion, she should be rotting in prison for the rest of her life after everything she's done. However, in 2007, Karla gave birth to a baby boy. I cannot tell you how much this infuriates me, but I'm also very thankful that she did not have a baby girl, because of everything she did with those young children. I couldn't imagine her raising a baby girl. Quebec's Children's Aid Society said that despite Karla's past, the new mother would not automatically be scrutinized. I just hope that she doesn't raise another version of Paul. I send all good vibes that this innocent baby boy does not inherit his mother's sadistic tendencies, and that he becomes an amazing human. As per new reports in 2016, Karla was living in, I apologize, I have no idea how to say this correctly, Chateauguay, Quebec. Even though I'm Canadian, I do not speak French very well. Anyways, she was living in that part of Quebec with her children. The last update was in 2020 that stated that Karla was living in another part of Quebec without her husband or her children. So what do you think about this case? Please leave your comments and your thoughts below. Next time, we'll be covering another chilling case, the disappearance of Cindy James. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for listening to Crime Time 911. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember to always trust your gut.